Welcome back. Protecting the United States by focusing on the economy. The Pentagon has a report out highlighting security risks in the defense sector. My next guest says focusing on economic issues will help address the gaps. Joining me right now is Assistant to the President for Trade and Manufacturing Policy, Peter Navarro. Peter, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Maria.
So you have an op-ed in today's New York Times with the headline, America's military industrial base is at risk. You highlight one key issue, and that is the labor shortage, writing this. One of the biggest vulnerabilities identified in the report is a shortage of skilled labor for critical jobs. America is simply not generating enough workers in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields to fill jobs in sectors such as electronic controls, nuclear engineering, and space. Nor are we training enough machinists, welders, and other skilled trade workers to build and maintain our ships, combat vehicles, and aircraft. How is the administration solving this, Peter? And tell us how this coincides with your worries over China.
Sure. And let me tell you a little bit about, more broadly, the report, which will be delivered by the Deputy Secretary of the Defense today to the President. This report is historic. The motivation for it is President Trump's maxim that economic security is national security, and the corollary simply that a strong manufacturing and defense industrial base is critical to our economic prosperity and national defense. And so what this report does is it looks at the supply chain, the sub-tiers of our supply chain that go in to build things like the F-35 or ships. What we want to do is assess gaps in that, and this report uncovers close to 300 vulnerabilities. That's the bad news. The good news, we're going to quickly fill them, but it's things like turrets for our tanks, propeller shafts for our subs, rocket fuel for our missiles, space infrared detectors for our missile defense. It also, as you noted earlier, uncovers some significant labor gaps, both at the STEM level and the trade skills level. So what the President is going to do today, in addition to receiving the report, is also going to set in motion a blueprint for action, which is going to include support for some companies in the sub-tiers of our supply chain that really need some help for modernization and expansion. We're going to move. We have a fairly heavy dependence, particularly on China, for a lot of our critical materials. We're going to ramp up an existing stockpile program to get some buffers there. On the labor front.
Let me stop you there, Peter, because how reliant are we on China for some of our weaponry? There's this article that's pointing out that some of the components in our weapons are made in China.
Maria, it's a significant part of the report with respect to China. There's a couple of things going on. One is the critical materials, for example, like rare earths. In the report, it's documented that China systematically has dominated both the downstream part of the industry and the upstream. What they do then is they dump these things onto the market, put capacity out of business here in America and elsewhere around the world, consolidate their monopoly, and then, as we saw in 2012 in the Japan situation, they can use that as a political weapon to force people to back down. But this report is not about China. It's about something much broader. It's the first modern assessment of our industrial base. President Trump is the first president to think and act strategically about the defense industrial base since Dwight D. Eisenhower. And it's really a stunning report. DOD did a great job. This originated with an executive order that came out of my office that the president signed. We spent over a year on this.
Yeah, no, I understand that it's not necessarily about China, but we are right now in a spat with China. And I'm just wondering how vulnerable the U.S. is should we need to get these important parts and components for our weaponry in the middle of a fight with China if we're also relying on them for so many important products.
It's more than a spat. Vice President Pence's excellent speech yesterday basically reset the relationship, just as the 2017 national security strategy of the president did. We now look at China not as someone simply as peaceful economic engagement, but more as a strategic competitor. And so this is a wake-up call. This report does highlight vulnerabilities that we need to address, not just because we're dependent on China for components. And you raise an interesting point. Printed circuit boards have basically gone offshore to Asia. Machine tools have gone offshore to Asia. So these dependencies are out there. We're going to solve them through President Trump's leadership.
But how long is this going to go on, Peter? I mean, you're talking about a dictator for life. I mean, is there any end in sight? Is this going to go on years? The Chinese are willing to wait years, right?
Well, look, my focus today with this report is to focus on a strong manufacturing and defense industrial base that protects this country. It also puts our men and women to work with their hands at good wages in factories around this country. And the best defense against anyone, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, anybody, is a solid economic base and a solid manufacturing and defense industrial base. So I think that's what this report does. It basically provides a blueprint. It tells us where our vulnerabilities are. It tells us how we need to fix them.
Well, it's important for the American public to see that and to better understand where those vulnerabilities are.